Somebody's showing off their nice bike.
That's something. You know, it's just a piece of furniture. It's not for real use.
We are now live on YouTube.
You can see who's on. Are we close, Nicole, to a quorum?
I believe so, Mr. Chair.
Okay, let me go to here. I'm gonna change mine to gallery view, just to, that checks that. Speaker view, okay.
Mr. Chair, I think we can get started anytime you're ready.
Okay, first off, welcome. We've got a couple of new, well, I don't want to count Herb as new, but he's able to join us. We've got a couple of new people on with us. It's with a sad heart that we want to look to start the meeting this time, though, is that we've lost one of our longtime members, Bill Steele, passed away recently. Bill, it was on February 21st, and he was 82. And Bill had served on this committee for 8 years. His wife, Pooh, is still living, and Bill was a very successful business person and absolutely an addition to our CTAC committee. And what I'd like to ask, if I may, is just may we observe a moment of silence in remembrance of Bill. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it. On a little better note is on this is that I hope that he's on the call. I have actually had a chance not to meet him in person, but speak to him by phone. But we have a new member joining us, and his name is Bob Powers. Bob has been in business for a number of years. Grew up in the Fairfax area, but he moved to Powhatan in 2019, and Bob has applied and been asked to serve. And I will tell you, I've talked with him and everything that I've seen. I can assure you that this is a gentleman that will become very involved with us, as well as the RVA, Plan RVA, things of that nature. So please join me in welcoming Bob. If you get a chance, please, reach out to him. I'm sure his information will be available there on the website and be updated. But Bob, welcome to the Community Transportation Advisory Committee.
Robert, thank you very much. It is an absolute pleasure to join y'all, and I look forward to hopefully not getting in the way too much, and hopefully making a contribution. And I'm just thankful to be on the group.
Great. Well, the next thing that we go to, we can actually do not have to go through the statement. But Nicole, if you would, I would appreciate if you call roll call. When you hear your name, if you would please just answer with either present or I, we'd appreciate it. So Nicole, if you'll take that away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll start with Town of Ashland, Vice Chair Martin.
Present.
Chesterfield County, Ms. Beals.
Present.
Mr. Richwine. Mr. Jordan. Chair Basham.
Here.
Hanover County, Mr. Rasnick. Henrico County, Ms. Lancaster.
Present.
New Kent County, Ms. Guthrie.
Present.
Mr. Moyer. Powhatan County, Mr. Powers.
Here.
City of Richmond, Ms. Erickson. Mr. Barnhart. Mr. Hill. Chamber RVA, Mr. Easter.
Present.
Mr. Mayman. NAACP, Mr. Minor. Mr. Johnson.
Present.
League of Women Voters, Ms. Coles.
Here.
Ms. Crutchfield. Richmond Area Bicycling Association, Mr. Bai. Mr. Burnley.
Present.
Virginia Association of Railway Patrons, Mr. Testerman.
Present.
Virginia Conservation Network, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Fisher.
Present.
And Virginia Commonwealth University, Mr. Leonard.
Present.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. And Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Appreciate it. The next is the, excuse me, any consideration or changes that anyone needs or feels needs to the meeting agenda? Not hearing any. Look to move on. The next is that, of course, this has been sent out. I would like to have what I call it is a motion of acclamation to approve the meeting minutes unless someone first says that they see something's wrong. Anybody see anything wrong? May I have a motion to approve by acclamation?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're past there. All righty. Our next part is open public comment period. First off, I'll ask Nicole, do you have anyone in queue that's for open public comment period?
No, Mr. Chair, and we have not received any comments for today's meeting.
Okay, is there anyone that's actually joined us live that it's open public comment period? All right, hearing none, we're going to move on to, and Champ, appreciate the update that Bud, you just got off with him and that he's doing well. I was really hoping that he would have a chance to be on today because we want to recognize one of our own, known Bud for years and years. The thing is that Bud was nominated and received, the thing was on March the 9th, the Valentine's Richmond History Makers and Community Update. And basically, he was nominated and became on there. It was for improving regional transportation, for his endeavor to work collaboratively to develop solutions that improve efficiency and of access to transportation across all jurisdictions. So one of our own is getting recognized, and a big thank you to Bud's service, and congratulations on being a part of Richmond's history. So,
Mr. Chairman, Champ here. I'll make sure
Yeah.
I pass that along, and I'm sure he will appreciate your acknowledging that.
Yes, and by the way, just remember that this is being recorded. If you'd like to go back and catch this, at least just one little bit of it, he will know.
I will
right.
let him know. Thanks.
Thanks, Champ. Moving on, we have the Rrtpo updates, and this is Chet Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you see on the screen, we wanted to give the committee an update on the activities that staff are engaged with. And these are our updates from our technical advisory committee as well as the policy board. There was a draft recommendation of smart scale allocations from VDOT staff that were communicated to the CTV in January, and I believe that the final awards for smart scale funding happen in May or June of this year, towards the end of it. So there are links in the packet, as you can see on the screen. I'd like to see the projects that were recommended. There's a lot of information there. If you have had a chance to look at it already and have more questions, please feel free to contact myself or other folks on staff. And I also encourage you to go back and look at the presentation that's right there at the bottom, item 6, that was provided by Chad Tucker from VDOT. That's probably he's the source for a lot of the smart scale information. We do have an updated vision, goals, and objectives statements for our long-range plan, Connect RBA 2045. Those were adopted and guiding our process as it moves forward. Go ahead and scroll down. We do have a big effort between now and the end of September to finalize the long-range plan. So if you haven't seen it, this is a good chance to ask for your support. We have a current opportunity for public engagement and review and input on what we've called our universe of projects. And this is essentially a list of all of the potential projects that could be in the long-range plan. There were emails sent out. Hopefully you all got them as members of CTAC. There were also posts on our social media pages, as well as maybe some other communications from our partners and stakeholders. So if you haven't had a chance to do it yet, I'd encourage you to get on the website and provide your feedback on the university projects. If you would like us to resend that to you, please let Nicole or myself know, or Ken. We can make sure that you get it directly. But please use your networks to distribute this opportunity and happily receive your support on that. We are updating our federal performance measures. There are 5 safety performance targets that were reported on by Greta Ryan, who is leading our performance measures program. You can see the different categories there, safety, and then asset condition and system. Basically dealing with condition of highways and other facilities, bridges. And that information was communicated back for what our targets are going to be for this coming year. So that's information back to VDOT. And we have kind of stepped away from using the VDOT targets and have established our own based on past history and how our region in particular has been able to respond to the targets that have been set. So we feel good about these targets and like the direction that they're moving for the most part. Then we had Rstp transfer requests. And this was a specific one for the Richmond Marine Terminal. If you've been down there, there's a ton of great work going on at the port. And one of the projects that they're working on now is to install an outside the gate drop lot. Right now, for a truck to be able to make a container delivery to the port, it has to be there between certain hours when the gate is open. And that obviously adds to traffic loads on the interstate, as well as the local roads in the area. So this outside the gate drop lot will allow freight haulers to drop their containers at any point and have them brought into the gate when the port opens up. So it should help a lot with the traffic flow and providing some more flexibility for that are working with our partners at the port. Then there was a scheduled presentation for FTA Section 10 grant applications for our March 4th Policy Board meeting. That has been moved to our April Policy Board meeting, but that will happen, and Ken can provide some more information on this, but I believe we had 6 to 8 applications that Policy Board to endorse. And I believe that's the extent, correct, Nicole?
Okay, yeah, we going over current work efforts?
I have a question first.
Absolutely.
Chet, how are the containers left outside the gate? Is there a side loader or something, or do they leave a trailer chassis with the container on it?
That's a great question, Michael. I don't know the answer to it. I could certainly, we could find out and talk with Barb Nelson and get some more details.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question of Mr. Parsons? This is Robert Powers.
Certainly.
Mr. Parsons, at the TAC meeting that I listened to the proceeds from, there was a comment made by the presenter in response to, I believe, the Henrico County representative about the need for a what-if analysis tool, some way that we could use, basically model smart scale so that we could see what adjustments might be made so that scores could be improved and projects could be moved up the list. Do you have any status on that tool?
I don't have a status other than that is a planned improvement that the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment wants to include in the process.
Any notion of when we might see that tool come forth?
Not at this point, no.
Okay. One other question. Yeah, one other question, if I could. Is it conceivable that the notion or the concept and the challenge of extending broadband service throughout the Commonwealth could receive, or maybe it does, and I just haven't seen it yet, receive treatment in the comprehensive plan as it might extend to mobility access?
Yes, I believe so. We have the opportunity through the long range plan to discuss and recommend policy goals, and I believe broadband would fall under that. We are not able to, at least as far as I know, MPOs are having a difficult time modeling impacts of broadband to transportation. But I think that we can easily make the argument that increasing broadband availability is something that will greatly benefit all the new transportation technologies that are coming out, connected vehicles, et cetera. So yes, I think that there is a place in the long range plan.
And Mr. Parsons, for people to be able to schedule mobility services that don't have broadband and that can avail themselves of that access to schedule such things. And I would, even in my mind, extend that, and I guess it may be a stretch to consider it from a transportation perspective, but people need access to telemedicine services. And I know out here in Powhatan County, and I assume it's true throughout in all the rural counties, that broadband access is an ongoing issue and problem. And I just hope that it can receive a hearty endorsement and a policy position or statement could be made in the transportation plan.
Okay, Mr. Chet, if we may, we want to move on to the current work efforts.
Absolutely.
Hey, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Hello, please identify yourself.
Yeah, Champ here. Chet, let me ask too, in light of COVID and broadband access and people that are staying out of the offices and working from home, is the TPO doing anything right now to analyze that? From the context, we do a lot in Cmec to reduce congestion and reduce air pollution, things like that. Or do we have any internal efforts to try to track that and see what the correlation might be, especially in the context of broadband access and how that could have long-term transportation ramifications?
We are actively tracking commuting patterns. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to the answer you're interested in, but we are actively tracking impacts from COVID on commuting patterns, time of day, peak hour travel, that kind of thing. So we get an idea of some work from home trends that are happening. In terms of direct correlation to broadband and the need for broadband, we haven't been able to figure out a way to think geographically about access and where there might be gaps to fill based on where people live. But I think that's an intriguing prospect.
Well, and one more follow-up on that. So, yeah, at one point, and I can't remember if we were compliant or not, but I think we were getting about $30 million a year in Cmec funds. And again, I'm just wondering if, in fact, we could get broadband throughout the region. You know, what is the correlation to our pollution, and in effect, is that helping us with our Cmec numbers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know there are specific eligibility requirements for Cmec funding. I want to say that broadband access is a stretch, but I'll certainly check it out in more detail, and that's an opportunity. Cmec right now is, as you know, is going towards a lot of projects that are focused on reducing pollutant loads on the system, non-single occupant vehicle travel, whether that's bike ped projects or transit improvements. And Ms. Tim is probably going to be able to talk about that a lot more detail than I am. But we've got no shortage of needs for Cmec funds in the region, and the applications show that.
As long as we're asking questions, may I ask a question?
Yes, just if I may, folks, just please, I know that's you, Virginia, but please just, say who you are so Nicole can easily, what I'm saying, since she's taking minutes and things.
Okay, Nicole, I'm Virginia Coles, and I have a question about the universe of projects. I understand that these are regionally significant projects, and I just wonder exactly how this list came about. I think I missed something in the long range transportation plan planning, but could you briefly summarize who makes this list and how it comes about?
Yes, yeah, glad to. Yes, the universe of projects is a list of regionally significant potential projects. As we started this, I'll start back at the beginning. When we started the long range transportation plan development process last year, the first thing we did was to get an idea. We did lots of surveys and public engagement about what the issues are around the region. Where are all the problems and the hotspots, and what are the experiences people are having that need to be addressed through the long range plan. Once we had that, we were able to go out and work with our member governments as well as our other planning partners to collect and tabulate all of the projects, plans, studies that were underway in the region. So there's lots of different categories of projects that either local governments were doing or considering, projects that VDOT or DRPT were considering, that GRTC ride finders were considering. So that gave us a good foundation for potential projects to include in the long range plan. We looked at the current version of the long range plan to transfer over projects that did not get funded last time that might still be relevant today or in the future, and added those. And then finally, we did some surveys about where people saw the needs to be, and tried to fill in gaps between those projects we knew were being developed and where there were still issues. So all of those types of things were compiled into a master list of potential projects. And then we applied our criteria for what makes a regionally significant project. And that narrowed down the list some, but it's helpful because as a Metropolitan Planning Organization, we're only supposed to consider projects that have impacts across the region. We're not supposed to be looking at smaller scale projects, adding a crosswalk at a particular intersection, those kinds of things that are outlined in the criteria. And I'm sorry I don't have that in front of me to read off the list of what makes a project regionally significant. But that narrowed everything down to where we stand today with the university project, and that's what was sent out as the baseline to consider.
Well, thank you. And you understand that I'm concerned about crosswalks, and you answered that they are not considered regionally significant, that it's something that localities should address on their own, I take it. But I do want to follow up. So if a project is not on the universal list of projects, it cannot be funded. Is this what happens?
If it's not on the universe of projects, well, so the next, let me take a step back, Ms. Virginia. My comment about the crosswalks is not intended to be all encompassing. I will emphatically state that it depends on where the location is. If it's a major intersection improvement that has regional impacts in a particular part of the area, then included crosswalks and bicycle pedestrian facilities would absolutely be a consideration. But if you're looking at a smaller roadway or a neighborhood street, that's where it may not be considered regionally. So it depends on the location in terms of what's included or not. The universe of projects itself is going to be used now as we take all of the projects there and test them through our travel demand model and GIS analysis and other types of tools that we can make data-driven decisions on to see whether there are impacts to the overall travel network. And that's going to help us develop priorities out of the university project. So not all of these projects are going to be included in the final plan. A lot of what happens from now on is measured by what the impacts are going to be by constructing or improving so-and-so and how that impacts the overall region. And then once we have the priority list, we'll be able to look at what we've been budgeted for the dollars available and see how we can match up the available dollars to the priorities. So there's going to be a portion of the overall priority list that is not able to be funded through the line. And I will say that if it's not funded through our constrained plan, there are absolutely other ways to fund projects. The nice thing about doing this with our university projects is we'll have a priority list, so then we can say these projects, although they aren't able to be funded with federal dollars, we do see these as priorities, and that'll add some weight to making grant applications and other opportunities for funding things that aren't on the constraint list. And there are local dollars available. There are Rstp and Cmec and other sub-allocated funds available. There's other ways to build things if it's not on the constraint project list.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, folks, we need to sort of move on. If I may, if you've got additional questions, please either A, email them to Chet, or B, you can type them over in the chat room. Nicole can make sure that he gets those, and I'm sure he'll get back to you. But if I may, go ahead, Mr. Parsons, with your next part.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. This is why we're here. We want this conversation to happen. I've talked a little bit about the long-range plan, so we can move on. There's work being done right now with our Ashland Trolley Line and Fall Line projects, and how those fit into our regional and bicycle pedestrian plan update. I think that the work that's being done by Phil Reagan and Barb Jaycox and Dan Mata is amazing right now. We've talked about this before. We haven't updated the regional bike ped plan since 2004. there's a lot of great work being done by our staff and our advisory committees. That this is a good effort that informs our long-range plan. We are working right now and following, as folks on the committee are, like Champ, the legislation and the budget for the state, and finding ways to identify funds that can be used to build the fall line. That's something that's ongoing and will continue into. So that's an exciting prospect, and we're trying to reach out as much as possible to help in that effort. Lots of work groups that are functioning right now. The Public Transportation Work Group, our Rstp Cmec subcommittee, our Rural Transportation Advisory Committee. They're all being very, very active and great support from the CTAC, from our TAC, and from individual stakeholders in the region. I will offer that the Vision Zero work group is on hiatus, but we're excited because VDOT and their individual engineering consultant are going to be able to help us develop a regional action plan focused on safety around the region, and something that we haven't done before in the Richmond region. Look at where the problem, the hotspots are in terms of traffic safety and how all the different modes interact. So be on the lookout for updates on that as the effort gets underway. And as I get more information on the schedule, I'll be sure to pass that along. Basham as well as.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions from that, folks? Okay, well, moving on, we are to new business now. And the first thing we have is a Grtc update. I know that she was on, I saw her earlier. And we have Julie Tim of Grtc on to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. It is afternoon. I'm going to share my screen here. Make sure that that's showing. Can you all see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, great. So I know that there's a lot of conversation around transit that's happening regionally. I came here to Richmond approximately a year and a half ago to lead Grtc, and I believe this is my first opportunity to present to you what Grtc is doing, what they've been doing, and what they're going to be doing over the next couple of years. So I look forward to kind of giving you a little bit of a baseline about the organization and then answering some more detailed questions. And I'm sure with this group there will be plenty of detailed questions. You all have a lot of inquiries. I look forward to this. So, well, I was going to say so, but obviously I didn't. This isn't working. Hold on. There we go. Awesome. So the first thing is I wanted to make sure that you have a baseline understanding about who we are and what we do. Not everyone knows about Grtc, the Greater Richmond Transit Company, who we are or where we serve. Although we provide, we're the main public mass transit provider for the RVA region, which is a large region, our service really is focused predominantly in Richmond and in Rrtpo, and we're expanding into Chesterfield. There's great news about that. And that's our current service area. Within that service area, we provide local bus, commuter bus rapid transit, and paratransit services. Those are our core services that we provide to the community. In 2018, before I got here, this region launched the Pulse, and it launched a whole system redesign of our local bus service. When transit ridership across the country was dropping by double digits, this visionary movement from the RVA region resulted in double-digit increases of ridership locally, which is pretty phenomenal, and it shows that the investment in transit here really does show rewards in the economic development of the community. With that growth, there was then a plan between DRPT and Plan RVA and the region to continue that expansion. Starting as soon as FY22, we had started the planning before COVID. We're in the planning phase now. You may have seen some of the the communication that's come out around how do we spend that money, the Cvta, the Central Virginia Transportation Authority money that's coming to transit. But we're in that process now. So even though we were slowed down a bit by COVID, we are still in that growth and expansion mode as the whole region looks to prioritize investments in transit and investments in our community. Now, what does that investment look like? This kind of gives you a little bit of a transition. We're moving our funding revenue balance about where the money is coming from and where it's going to. And this is pre-COVID versus post-COVID. So pre-COVID, that was FY22. Our fiscal years run pretty similar with the rest of the region, that it's July 1 through June 30th of the next year. So FY21 is the fiscal year that we are in now. Pre-COVID, as we were developing our budget, we were looking at the amount of money that would be coming from our federal, state, local sources in fare box, and our need being around $56 million. When COVID hit, we saw a very quick reduction in our local allocations. We knew that was likely coming anyway because of the regional funding, but COVID certainly solidified the economic recession and the reduction that we got from local resources. We didn't get as much money from the state as they also saw a contraction, and that created this black hole in our budget of $26 million. Not only did we have to cover the zero fares that we went into for the protection of our staff and the protection of our community with the pandemic, we had to cover the reduction of our local allocations as they were also trying to cover their internal needs through the pandemic, and we had increased costs associated with the PPEs, the masks, the additional cleaning that we put on our buses, the hand sanitizer, and the telework applications that we need to put throughout our organization to keep everyone safe, increase our costs for that middle pie chart. As we look forward to next year, as we get vaccines coming in and things start to normalize, and the Cvta money begins to become more an active part of our budget, the expectation is that if you can see my mouse, that $20 million that we're expecting for next year is a portion of the Cvta money that will cover the amount of money that was reduced from our local allocations. Now that we're receiving regional money to support that instead, it will also support the ongoing cleaning and needs for the fleet and the industry that we experienced under COVID. Those will now become permanent as part of our transit. And it's also covering some of the natural increases in costs that we would experience moving forward with the increases in changes in gas prices, utilities, health insurance, liability, natural increases in wages. It also covers that. So in a very quick progression, we moved from a $56 million budget to a $64 million budget. This does not account for the amount of money that we expect from the region for expansion. I'll talk about that later. But you'll notice this does include $6.8 million that is assuming zero fares is revoked, and that we would put fares back as soon as July 1 of this year. I'll talk about that in a minute because that's not a foregone conclusion. It's just a budget placeholder as we have the conversation about how fares are used, implemented, and possibly removed for our region. So how will we use all that money? The first thing, of course, is $63 million. It's a big growth in a very fast time frame. The first thing we look to do is, of course, where can we become more efficient and more effective and make sure that our growth does not consume all of our resources disproportionately. When you look back to where can we push back and where can we become more effective and more efficient, the majority of our funding goes into our operations year over year, our maintenance, and our benefits. And as we have seen expansion of BRT, expansion of our service, more growth in transit as the region prioritizes that, that is where all of our money goes. You don't see these large increases in administrative costs. You see it really focused on putting that service on the street and making sure that the supporting infrastructure, the buses, are maintained in a state of good repair. So there's not a lot of place that we can look administratively to become more efficient, but we always do keep our eye on that to make sure that it stays in line, that the growth of any administrative cost stays in line with or less than the growth of our service costs. Now, who are we? You know, who is the market? Who do we serve? That's kind of our internal business. But when we look at who we serve, we did an onboard survey recently to see who's riding, where are they going, where are they coming from. The vast majority of the service of people who ride transit, they're riding from work to home and back again. And they're predominantly riding and to and from locations right around within a few blocks of transit service. That's our market. So if there's not a bus line near you, you're less likely to be able to use it or to have access to use it. You're going to be more reliant on the car. But that means that the people who are reliant on it to get to and from work, they are also using it for medical expenses, to get to healthcare, to get to food, to get to education, to get to recreation and parks, all the other areas that people who have the luxury of a car can get to. People who depend on transit will also use transit for those needs. This is a really interesting slide to me because as we look at who is riding our system and how they're paying for it, this gives us a kind of a glimpse of where our primary market really sits. The first series of graphs shows that the predominant service that we provide, the people that are using it, are on our local service. We had a very fast growth of the BRT when it was launched 2 years ago. Seeing that that's such a high percentage of our service comparatively is good. It means that BRT is very successful, and we want to expand on that. But our primary market continues to be local. Our express service of connecting and reaching out to the more suburban or rural areas is a very small percentage of our market. And when COVID hit, we saw a reduction across the country of the express market as people were able to telework. We saw a reduction here locally of the BRT market as VCU closed, the city closed, the state closed. People who were coming to downtown Richmond were able to telework. We saw a dramatic drop. What we did not see is a dramatic drop of our local service. The people who ride our local buses, the predominant share of our service is focused on essential workers who need this to get to and from work. Now, the next three kind of graphs over really kind of give a description about who is in each of those market shares. BRT, when you look at income, is pretty closely reflected to the local, so it's a proportional, where you have a large percentage of our ridership is making, you can start with this below 10,000, below 25,000, below $50,000 household income. That's who's riding our service. And so if you think below $50,000 household income, that's a pretty significant low income population. You see a similar percentage-wise on BRT. You don't see that as much on Express. Express, percentage-wise, you're seeing a lot more riders who tend to be a higher income rider. And when you look at this last column about how those groups of people are paying, you're seeing that in the BRT, there's a good, about half of them that are riding BRT are having their fares paid by the E-Pass, by the University Pass, by VCU Go, by their employer. Their employers are paying for their rides. Interestingly enough, that's about the same percentage as we saw reduction when COVID hit. When you see Express, same thing. The amount of reduction we saw when COVID hit is about the same amount of people who have their passes paid for by their employers, by the university. And when you look at the local, it's a similar reduction of it's a correlation that we saw a reduction of local by the same amount of people who are telework able. It's just an interesting correlation that gives us a lot of data when we start thinking about our fares and who's paying for fares and how we're collecting it. When we then started looking at, under COVID, who's riding that local bus service, since that is our primary market, and since that market did not drop during COVID, as we saw across the country, transit ridership dropped, as ours did not. Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? We start looking at the correlation between high ridership routes and economically distressed areas, and to me, it's a jaw-dropping correlation. The majority of our riders who continue to ride through COVID, 30, 40 people on a bus, are coming from and going to areas that continue to be economically distressed and have low incomes and low access to jobs. So what does that mean for us when we start looking at the equity of transit? Equity of transit is, we celebrate the BRT and we celebrate the success of it, and we want to provide additional resources for the suburban and the rural areas to connect into and to be part of this regional transit network. But when you start looking at the equity of it, obviously fares are predominantly the burden of the low income. And when you start looking at where we put our infrastructure, there's a high infrastructure investment in BRT, which is being supported by businesses, and a low investment in infrastructure on routes such as the 1C, which is currently hourly service. Mr. Watson, Walter Watson, is a vet who was waiting on hourly service to get to the VA on 45-degree weather. And it's a stark comparison that we in transit need to start considering how we're placing our dollars to support our core market and our core riders. When we think about that from the perspective, that's the infrastructure perspective. From the fare perspective, when we look at the amount of that $6.8 million we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, of that $6.8 million, about $1.7 million is needed just to collect that 6.8. If we didn't collect fares, we wouldn't be expending $1.7 million to collect it. So really what we have is, if we go zero fare, we have a need of 5.3 million approximately. Should we then keep that fare structure in place so that we can ensure that we collect money from the express riders? Well, the express riders are really only paying about $500,000, and we know that's predominantly coming from their employers, not from them. Should we keep the fares in place so that the Pulse riders, again, we know the predominant amount of the bus riders that aren't riding, they're getting their fares paid for by either VCU or the state or other employers. So we're expending $1.7 million specifically so we can collect about $5 million from our local low-income riders. It starts to become a conversation of, is that even equitable to be able to pay the expenses to collect fares just so we can be sure that we collect those fares from low-income people? When we have conversations about what zero fares has meant for them through the pandemic and before the pandemic when we piloted it, those same populations have told us that zero fares has been life-changing for them. The ability to go on multiple interviews a day, to be able to get from work to food to the doctor and back again, to make multiple trips per day and not have to restrict to 1 or 2 trips, has transformed their ability to connect to the community and to access the resources many of us can take for granted. And how do we pay for that investment? It's a conversation that's ongoing. It does mean that if we're going to stay zero fares past the COVID pandemic, past the time when it's a need for our health, our monetary health or our physical health, do we keep it for our economic health? The state and the stimulus packages that we've received are going to allow us to have a conversation of maintaining zero fares for a pilot period for potentially a couple of years, should our partners agree that that is a wise use of those dollars. And over the course of several years, if we can find that this is successful, it increases our economy, it increases our prosperity, and we can find that investment to put into it, it could potentially become an ongoing part of who we are and our identity for transportation and the equity of our transportation moving forward. So our commitment in GRTC is to really champion some of these equity issues and focus on our core market, to look at the not just the geographic mobility of our riders, but also the social mobility and connectivity of our communities. And that's our commitment looking forward, making sure that we're focusing not just on local bus, but also for those areas that are lower income or differently incomed who aren't near bus transit. How do we also provide those multimodal connections and on-demand connections to help them access that transit network or other areas that aren't on the transit network? And how do we partner for a complex mobility solution beyond the bus that serves our entire region? And that's GRTC's focus moving forward. So a few slides now on what are our next steps, now that we know that we have an equity and a prosperity goal and mission for GRTC to connect through transit and other mobility resources. We know we need to improve our local infrastructure. We know we need to improve our stop connectivity. We need those sidewalks, and we need the shelters. We need that micro transit to get people in. We need the local and route connectivity so that when people are transferring between modes, between a car and a bus, or between a bus and another bus, that they have a way that they can make that transfer in a dignified way so they're not staying in the snow. We need to look at expanding and pushing more Pulse. The Pulse was very successful. It reached a lot of businesses and a lot of homes. And we need to be looking north and south, where we have some of the areas that are more economically disadvantaged. How do we connect them to some of the premium services so that they can have access to that? And we also always need to be looked to future-proof electrification and the environmental impacts of our technologies. I'm going to go through these very quickly. Oh, shoot. Okay, I thought this was the last slide. I apologize. I moved it up because I thought it was so important that you all hear this. As we're looking at zero fares, like I said, we have the Cvta money coming in. I showed you before that it was about $20 million going into our baseline budget just to serve what we have now. There's another $7 to $10 million of that Cvta money that's specifically set aside for expansion, that as we put more service to make sure that we have higher frequency service and more connectivity for our populations, that we put that money in the right place. We've been working with Plan RVA very closely. They have been incredibly supportive in developing the next steps on where to put this service expansion and where to put higher frequency. In this particular model, which is one of the ones that's being explored, it shows that putting that higher frequency in the extension will increase access to jobs. All those blue dots, that I'm pointing to it, you can't see me point, it's silliness, use my mouse here. All of these blue dots show that as we put higher frequency out and as we put higher connectivity out, those are the amounts, the new jobs that are reachable in 45 minutes compared to what we have today. So it truly opens up opportunities to jobs and resources by putting this service expansion out there. So we're very excited about that. It will start incrementally coming into play in FY22. We also know that we have to improve our performance and efficiency. I said efficiency is important, not only administrative, but as we put this out, we don't want to keep putting buses out that are empty. We need them to be reliable. We need them to be on time. We need them to be efficient and effective. And so we'll be looking quarterly at our routes to make sure that they are producing and they are being productive for our communities. Right now, these are some numbers that we got through COVID. Our on-time performance is pretty low, and we have a couple of routes that we're looking at that are underperforming. How can we can support them, or do we need to look at other ways to help them perform better, or reallocate those resources to other routes that will perform better for our communities? So we're looking at that internally, but we'll also be reporting this out to the board, to the Cvta, and our partners, so that we're partnering where to effectively put our resources. As I said, we have a lot of infrastructure investments, and this is where the Plan RVA, while they don't necessarily provide us that specific operational support, they are critical to us in providing the infrastructure support that transit needs. We partner on those. While a lot of money goes into roads, we do need to be focusing on those shelters and on those stops and on the sidewalks and the crosswalks so that they're available for bicycles and pedestrians and transit users, and balance the priorities of our roads so that they're not always heavily weighted towards prioritizing car traffic, but prioritizing a balanced use for all users. And this is what that looks like when we start prioritizing those shelters. These are shelters that have been approved by Rrtpo and by Richmond, and we're going to be putting more of these out through the region as we have the funding to do so. And that's capital money that's outside of what I talked about before I showed you operating. This is the capital money that we receive from federal, state, and from Plan RVA. This shows that right now we have the limited money we have. We spread those resources around. All those blue dots and red dots are areas where we're putting new shelters out this year, coming up this next fiscal year. And every year you'll start seeing more and more of these. As we have more money, we'll put more shelters out and more connections out. We also talked about before the need for people as they transfer from one mode to another or transfer from one bus to another to be able to do so in a more dignified way, that they're not out in the elements. These 4 areas show those areas where we have the majority of our transfers between buses and the areas that we'll be focusing on for a transfer center. One of those is 23rd and Franklin downtown. We have a lot of transfers down there, and in order to transfer between our bus routes and the Pulse, we need some better connectivity. It's not very walkable. You can see the circled area, 23rd Street. There's a bus stop over there, and the Pulse over down at the bottom. And to be able to connect to those, there's a pretty strong hill there. Makes it very difficult to connect to for most people, but if you have access issues, it can be even more difficult. So we'll be looking at how to bring those together for better transfers. We'll be looking at the west end, on the west end of the Pulse near Enrico, so how we can help transfers between the different bus routes that come together there, as well as possible parking rides, so that people can use van pools or carpools to come in and access the system on the west side. We're looking at a permanent downtown transfer center in Richmond, downtown. Currently, this blue box shows our current temporary transfer center, which is about to be moved because of the sale of the security building. This is what that looks like. You can see that it's pretty run down, and in order to get from one bus to another, you might have to go all the way down the street or back, and it's hard to, if you don't know the system very well, you don't know where your connecting bus route is. What we're looking for is something more along the lines of these as examples. It could be still an outward or an outdoor connection center, or it could be something like they're doing in Raleigh. They've done in Nashville, they've done others where it's indoor and you have mixed use and you have air rights above it that are sold for commercial development that can then be productive to support the center and also support the tax base of the economy. So downtown in each of these transfer centers, we're looking at these types of options. So when people are transferring between a bus, they're not sitting in a ditch, they're connecting through something that has better amenities and is more comfortable. We're also looking, as we look at expansion of the buses and service, we look at the possible zero fares. We know that some of our buses are packed. Throughout COVID, they've been packed. So we're looking at 60-foot articulated buses. And how will they fit on our streets? How will they fit on the Pulse service, as well as all these service expansions, so that more people can connect on these buses? It's a little bit more of an investment. These buses cost about 50% more than our normal buses do, but they also hold 50% more people. So a small capital investment up front means that we can reduce or limit the operational cost of putting more buses out. We just put longer buses out. And they actually, in some cases, fit on the streets better, because of the accordion in the middle means they can turn more nimbly than a 40-foot bus that doesn't have it. And that's the end of the presentation. I rushed through that. I know that we were short on time, and there's so much in there to unpack. I just want to give you a taste of the vision that we have moving forward for GRTC. Some of the things I didn't mention are the vaccine van that you may have heard of. We're trying to have connections with, in this past week, with our health districts, so that even in areas where we don't have transit, people have a way to connect between where they live and the vaccination clinics. USERV has been a partner with us on that. Uber has reached out to partner on it, and we're working to, even as I speak, I have meetings yesterday, this morning, and tonight to try and create some more of those connections throughout the region to make sure that transportation is not a barrier to jobs, it's not a barrier to health, it's not a barrier to education and food, but it's an opportunity to connect people for the prosperity of the entire region.
Well, Julia, I want to say thank you very, very much. And folks, I want to open it up that if you have some questions for Julie, please say who you are and ask the questions.
Hey, Julie,
I said it all.
Julie, this is John Easter. Great presentation. Thanks for doing that. You covered a lot of territory very quickly. I just wanted to follow up on one thing. Back when we were trying to get the Cvta approved at the General Assembly, there was a lot of questions about localities maintaining their level of effort, basically the amount of funding that they were going to be putting in. From the state people, there was the concern they didn't want to be giving new tax revenue and having that just take the place of local funding. I realize COVID has probably made it very difficult to say, but can you tell yet? You mentioned the localities have cut back some on their funding, but are you still getting a net plus in transportation funding when you combine the Cvta funds plus the locality funds?
I would say yes, we are getting a net plus. The localities did change their local allocations to conform to the level of maintenance permissible in the legislation, which meant that they could cut back to 50%. The amount coming in from the Cvta is greater than that amount, so it is a net positive.
Thank you.
Ms. Tim, this is Michael Testerman. Welcome aboard. From our past involvement in transit in the region, going back at least 20 years, I am personally familiar with a lot of other former executive staff at Grtc who have gone on to such cities as Portland, Oregon, and Jacksonville, Florida, well, Florida in general. And I've always had big ambitions for our own city. And I think from the webinars and things that I'm still attending, we're looking at our transit systems as becoming transformative in really scaling up in ways that they haven't been in the past. We've done things incrementally. And in fact, federal programs don't allow us to do much more than think incrementally. But I'm just letting you know that there are folks out there that are going to be rooting for you if we come up with really grand schemes to shift a lot of the traffic that is intra-regional on the interstate system back to high-capacity mass transit systems, which then in itself could be scaled up for electrical compulsion, which will then further lower our energy cost of providing that transit and that mobility. So anyway, just saying welcome aboard and good luck.
Thank you. I don't know who said it originally. The CEO I worked for in Nashville repeated it. He stole it from someone, and I'm going to steal it from him. Transportation, there is no silver bullet. It's more like silver buckshot. And transit has several pieces of that buckshot. We have to do it together, though.
Julie, once again, this is Bob Basham. Once again, thank you very, very much for taking your time and joining us today. We appreciate it very much and hope to see you again sometime very soon.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, and if I apologize if I say this incorrectly, Danny Plogger, I apologize, is going to give a presentation on high-speed passenger rail.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Let me get my presentation up.
No problem. And Danny, please forgive me. How do you pronounce your last name?
Plogger, like a logger with a P.
Okay, no problem. Well, first one I was on, but the second one I was close. Yeah.
Sorry. There we go. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's hard going after Julie. She's very dynamic. So if I put everybody to sleep, my apologies. It is about lunchtime, and I have a lot of data in this presentation. Thank you again for allowing me to present a little bit about Virginians for High-Speed Rail who don't know us. We are a nonprofit coalition of citizens, businesses, localities, and community groups that educate and advocate for the expansion of better intercity passenger rail service. We are 27 years old, and we were founded in 1994 as a partnership between the Greater Richmond Chamber of Commerce and an economic development group down in Hampton Roads called the Future of Hampton Roads. And so the basis of my presentation a little bit is to give you an update on the big Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative, and to talk about why that is so important and how we got here. Simply put, Virginia is changing and our transportation challenges are increasing, and I know this committee knows all about that. Over the last 30 years, our population has increased about 38%, with 81% of that population growth happening along our urban crescent. For those who don't know, the urban crescent represents only about a fifth of our land mass and is home to about 70% of our citizens. And so it's going to be getting a little bit more congested over the next 20 years. Our road network, meanwhile, has only grown about 13%, and vehicle miles traveled as the measurement of traffic has kept up with population and actually exceeded it, growing about 42%. When you look at highways, which is important for intercity rail, our highway capacity has only grown about 13% in Virginia over the last 30 plus years. and vehicle miles traveled on those highways has grown 75%. And so before COVID, if you ever wondered why traffic on I-95 or 64 sucked, this pretty much sums it up. It's just because more people on less capacity. And the same is true with our flights. The number of flights at our airports in Virginia has decreased about 24%. A lot of that is due to consolidation between the different airlines, but passengers per flight has increased about 144%, especially as they continue to cram more and more seats into planes. You lose that legroom that results in more passengers. And so when you take all that together, this is kind of what it looks like. On the upper left is I-95. On the upper right, I believe, is Dulles. The bottom left, those are not my children. I just took that Photoshop picture, hopefully Photoshopped, off the internet. And then the bottom right is the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, usually given any given rush hour before COVID, obviously. And so when you break it out a little bit further, this is what vehicle miles traveled looks like on Virginia's interstates over the last really kind of 50 years since our interstates became as robust as they are. It's exceptionally gotten worse. We have not been able to pave our way out of traffic, no matter how hard we've tried. And if we were interested in paving our way back to 2000, we would need to build about 102 additional interstate lane miles. The cost of that would be around $44 to $45 billion, which is the equivalent of around 11 or 12 years of our entire transportation budget here in the state of Virginia, solely going to expanding our interstates and not doing anything else. No transit, no airports, nothing else, just expanding our interstate roadways. Secondly, young Virginians prefer their smartphones to cars. I have a nephew who purposely failed his driver's license test 3 times before my brother and his wife made him pass it so that he could assist with taking his younger siblings to and from school. When you look at driver's license in Virginia and you compare it to our age demographics, millennials, nearly 26% of millennials who are driving eligible or have the ability to get a driver's license don't. If millennials drove at the same rate as baby boomers or those between 55 and 74, traffic on Virginia's roadways would increase 9% basically overnight. So thankfully, the younger generation doesn't drive as much. And also, thank you to Julie and the partnership with VCU. I have a niece at VCU who does not have a car. She gets around by bus and occasionally Uncle Danny. And so that's how a lot of younger Virginians are moving around. And so this is very important when we're looking at what will the future transportation system look like in the coming decades. We have to keep this in mind that younger generations don't drive nearly as much as our older generations. And so when you look at Virginia in 2040, we're going to have about 1.3 million more Virginians. 1.1 million of those are anticipated to live within the urban crescent. And about 7 million Virginians by 2040 will live on less than 1/3 of our state's landmass. So we're going to be very packed. And so why are we moving the rail? Here are a couple quotes from our last 2 secretaries of transportation. The first, Aubrey Lane in 2016, was quoted as saying, "We have to move more people, not more vehicles." And that was one of the first time in my nearly 1.5 decades in transportation where we had a secretary who articulated really kind of the idea that a lot of transit or rail advocates have pushed for, which is that we got to get away from this thinking of how do we just move more and more cars, that it's really about those people inside those automobiles is who we need to focus on. And just last week, Shannon Valentine, in her testimony before the House of Representatives Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, was quoted as saying, widening I-95, according to a study that VDOT did, widening I-95 by 1 lane in each direction for 50 miles would cost about $12.5 billion. And by the time that construction was completed in 10 years, the corridor would be just as congested as it is today, meaning that they would spend $12.5 billion and get absolutely no benefit to congestion in Northern Virginia all the way down to Fredericksburg. And so that is the finding that led Virginia to rail. And so why trains? Simply put, because we've pretty much tried everything else, and passenger rail is successful. In Virginia, when you look at passenger rail since 2004, we've seen a 46% increase in passenger rail service. We've nearly doubled our ridership. 6.8 million Virginians have new or expanded service really over the last 16 years. They've generated about almost $10 billion in economic benefits, greatly reduced our greenhouse gas and carbon emissions, taking cars off the road, and reduced our fuel consumption. And so all in all, passenger rail has been very successful in Virginia as we've continually picked the low-hanging fruit, adding a train here, adding a station there, extending a train here. And so we've seen the benefits of increased ridership as we've expanded. If you build it, Virginians will come. And so what's next? In 2019, in December, the governor announced the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative. This is very exciting. It's for the first time in nearly 30 years plus. Virginia is purchasing railroad right-of-way. The Transforming Rail in Virginia program is a $3.7 billion program where Virginia buys over 350 miles of railroad right-of-way, 225 miles of railroad track. We will also construct an additional about 40 miles of new railroad track, expand the Long Bridge over the Potomac River, which is heavily congested today, adding an additional 2 tracks in a bunch of capacity. And when all is said and done, we will be able to expand our Amtrak service by nearly 50% over the next decade, as well as expand our commuter rail service in Northern Virginia by 53%. And 80% of Virginians will see new or improved service thanks to the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. Additionally, we have a study underway right now by the Department of Rail and Public Transportation looking at the Commonwealth Corridor, which is returning east-west passenger rail service here in Virginia, connecting Hampton Roads through Richmond over to Charlottesville, all the way down to Christiansburg and Roanoke. This is very exciting. The study will be done later this year. As part of this, before we even really passed the study, as we were advancing and building the coalition, Virginia announced that they were purchasing the rail corridor between Doswell over near Richmond, all the way up to Charlottesville and out to Clifton Forge. So a large segment, and the only portion that does not have passenger rail service today, the state of Virginia is purchasing. So that's very exciting for, I think, the future endeavors of expanding East Rail service. Today, if you wanted to go from Roanoke to Norfolk, you would have to transfer. You would have to take a train up to DC, transfer, and come back south, and it would take about 13 hours. And so doing an east-west connectivity that is car competitive, passenger rail, I think is going to open up a lot of opportunities here in Virginia for connectivity. And so this is essentially what our rail system has looked like over the last 16 years. This is before 2006. This is after we started expanding service here in Virginia from 2009 until 2018. This is the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative. And if you took all the studies and everything that has either been completed or is being looked at today, this is what rail service could look like by at least 2040. And this is all being done by Virginia basically alone. And so hopefully, as a new federal surface transportation bill moves forward, and Virginia has a strong federal partner, we will be able to realize a lot of this before the 2030 or 2040 timeframe, because we won't have to pay for it all by ourselves. We will have a robust federal intercity passenger rail program. And so what does this all mean for Richmond? Simply put, by 2030, it means that we will be increasing our passenger rail service by over 118%. And by 2040, we will be hopefully increasing our passenger rail service by over 220%. And so we're going to have a lot more service, a lot more connectivity, hourly train service up to Richmond or up to DC and on the Northeast corridor, much more improved reliability, as well as reduced trip times. And so there's going to be a tremendous amount of benefits for our region from all these investments. And so I see a lot of other advocates and friends on this. And so thank you all for helping pound the drum over the last 20 years. I think Virginia is now a leader when it comes to intercity passenger rail, and it's because we've slowly chipped away, we've done the incremental, and we've taken advantage of large opportunities when they arose. So thank you. I'll be glad to.
Sorry, folks. I'm saying I was trying to click on my mute button. I'm sorry, Danny. But I would tell you, as on that, I sort of figured Mike Testerman might have a question or two, but this is open to anybody that might have a few questions for Danny. Please go ahead.
And Mike is on my board, so he knows all about this.
He already knows. Okay.
Danny, this is Upton Martin, and I live a block from the Ashland train station, which is going through quite a bit of renovation due to handicap access, et cetera. It's been an interesting process to watch that. I think the construction crews have redone things 3 or 4 times, but it's getting there. Whose responsibility is to identify and pay for parking?
Parking primarily is going to be the local governments. A lot of the train stations are what the state considers primarily the local contribution. So Virginia will buy railroad right away. They'll do the investments and they'll chip in for some station improvements. But that's primarily the responsibility of the local governments.
Okay.
And they are investing in, David, the state has identified 42 million in station improvements around the state that they are beginning to invest, but they're going to be looking for some local support to accomplish that around Virginia, just not in the Richmond region.
All right, thank you. And thanks for the great presentation.
Thank you.
I'd ask about the third rail, but that will happen one of these days.
No comment.
Good answer.
Hey, Danny, this is John
Yes,
Easter. What upcoming opportunities are there for public input where you would like to have us supporting you on any sort of rail initiatives? Anything scheduled yet?
Yeah, absolutely. The federal is really where we're going to be turning our focus because I think there's going to be tremendous opportunity. One of the things that we have spoken with our delegation is that because Virginia has made all these investments outside of a federal partner, if there is a large infrastructure bill that invests in rail, states like Virginia that have gone it alone should not be penalized for having leadership when it comes to rail and multimodal transportation. So we're trying to make sure that the federal program supports programs like Virginia that are doing these big, exciting things. And so we'll obviously be launching a action page and encouraging our delegation to support a federal program and making sure that Virginia is at the front of the line because we have leadership. And I think that's a great opportunity for CTAC to voice the opinion as well, is to let Congressman McEachin and Spanberger and Whitman know, as well as our senators, that we need federal partner here in Virginia.
Are any of those 5 particularly key in terms of committee assignments or anything that we have to focus on, or just generally for all 5?
Really all 5. Virginia has no member of the House on transportation and infrastructure. So the bill that's, the committee that's going to be handling kind of the initial draft. Warner is on, I believe, banking committee that does handle some of this. So he will be very key in making sure that he understands how important this is for our region.
Thank you.
Anyone else with questions for Danny right now? Danny, thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. I thought it was an excellent presentation. Thank you for joining us today and taking your time.
Absolutely.
Our next update is from Barb J. Cox, which is going to let us know a little bit more about the 2021 session. Hi, Barb.
How are you, Chairman Basham?
Doing very well. Barb, I don't know if you can hear me, but your screen and your voice are frozen. It must be the bandwidth. Well, let's give her a moment to try and maybe see what that is. I know that my computer freezes up from time to time. Nicole or Ken, do we want to check on something else and look to bring Barb back, or what would you like to do?
Mr. Chair, this is Chet Parsons. I would say that Barb is going to be the lead on this in terms of knowledgeable presenter, but we do have what's on the screen is posted on the website, and I believe it was in terms of a written explanation of top bills from the general.
Okay, well.
It looks like she's dropped off. Maybe she'll try and call back in.
Yeah, she'll probably try to get back on. Sometimes that happens. If you get out and come back on, it'll reset. So let's give her just a moment and see if it comes back. How about that, Chet?
Sounds great. Thank you. Mr. Chair, as an alternative to sitting in silence, we could, if it's all right with you, we could go through the future meeting topics.
Yeah, I was just reading the yellow, and basically it's just saying that it's putting, the bottom line is to help them out. So no problem at all. Because I don't know how long that might last. Let's go to future meeting topics. If she happens to come back, that's a little thing. Is for July, for May, we're looking at telework and implications of commercial office space, the RSC ground transportation and parking, and ride finders overview. We do always in the VTrans update there for July. That will be something for Upton. But we do encourage is that if you would like to see something, or you feel that there's something that should be presented, to make sure and send that information to Ken, Chet, things of that nature, so that it can be brought up and we can put it on.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, particularly as we get into the out months, because I'm not hiding any list of topics here.
I am back if you wanted to pick up again.
Okay, bear with us just a second, Barb. Well, because we have
sorry, my internet just completely zoned out.
I understand. Go ahead, Bob. Is that Bob? I couldn't tell who was talking.
This is Ken Lance. I was just saying that
sorry.
If any of the members have suggested topics, particularly going into later on in the year, as you can see, I really don't have anything listed beyond September. So would welcome some ideas for presentations later on in the year.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Ken,
yes, ma'am.
This is Lisa Guthrie. I know that Delegate Dolores McQuinn had an equity and modernization study for transit that DRPT will be conducting, and they have to submit their first report to the General Assembly in December. So later in the year, you might ask them to present, or their consultant, who has not been named yet, to present on that study.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Lisa. We'll add that to the list.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is John Easter. I would love for us at some point, and I don't know when is the best timing, to have a little more discussion of our kind of lead priority projects once they've been approved or whatever. And in particular, I'd like to hear more discussion. I realize this isn't approved, but of the 64 widening project and, you know, the scope of that, how much still needs to be completed to connect to Williamsburg and all of that. So whatever the appropriate time to do that, you know, as opposed to just sort of, you know, quickly saying, here's the report and here's the list. I wouldn't mind hearing a little more detailed discussion about some of those key projects.
I understand, and I can see Chet basically he is shaking his head, so I'm sure that's something that we will put on the list. All right, folks, if I may, let's go back to Ms. Jade Cox, if you would. Barb, take it over.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
It's all right, it happens.
Zipped out. As I was saying, I look to any of you to offer comment. I have listened to the APA Virginia weekly calls, and these are the top transportation and land use, a lot of emphasis on land use action at the General Assembly. So that I know this is just like a glossing over a lot of legislation. Even though it was a short session, it was pretty active. So I just wanted to quickly go through this. Of course, we have the first one, House Bill 2054, which is a transit-oriented development, giving more latitude to the localities to incorporate parking ratios that will improve, you know, densities in areas that are served by transit in particular. The next bill I label as resiliency. There was a lot of discussion about trying to include resiliency as an indicator for smart scale, as projects that are more resilient than others would get extra points. Then it was decided that was too complicated. And as we all know, there's an awful lot that goes into smart scale scoring. And so they removed that and put it with the CTB to include resiliency as an effort through the 6-year improvement program, and also to make sure that it's incorporated into design standards on new construction projects. Environmental justice was extremely focused on in a number of ways. This next House Bill 2074 set up an interagency working group that would advise the executive branch of state government to designate an environmental justice coordinator and representing in the first year focused on current air quality monitoring practices, and making sure that public participation includes those in environmental justice communities and fence line communities that are affected by agency action. And then we have a lot, I'm sure Champ would probably want to be talking about this, about the bicycle bill that did get watered down a little bit by the Senate when they took out the one authority to treat a stop sign as a yield sign. But it did include some important language that helps those of us that are trying to pass bicyclists to be safer for them, that they you know, can ride two beside each other, and a vehicle on, you know, coming to a bicyclist can pass even over the yellow line if they need to. So that's giving that authority, and hopefully will make things safer and clearer how people should be acting. Cvta, this was a Dolores McQuinn's bill, added the executive director for the Virginia Port Authority or his designee as a non-voting ex officio member of the CTVA. And then again, equity, Lisa mentioned this about having this report out from the Transit Equity and Modernization Study. This would be conducted by JLARC in conjunction with DRPT. So I think it would be interesting to hear from them when they report out their December draft report.
Barb, I have to interject.
Yes, please.
That was a Senate amendment that was defeated in conference. So they went back to the House version.
They
So,
went back to the House version.
Jay
Okay,
Lark-
that's an update that I didn't have.
Jay Lark is no longer involved in this. This is a DRPT study.
It is just DRPT. Okay. You know, the state system was down when I was checking on that, so that's good to find out. And then there was also a House bill, which I don't have on here, 2283, where the SEC is looking at transportation electrification and utility recovery of certain costs for transit. There's a lot of planning legislation, several bills on energy storage, which is classifying them as exempt from state and local taxation, the first bill, the 2006. And then tree preservation, House Bill 2042, which allows localities to exceed the general requirements that are for tree replacement and conservation in there by ordinance. Affordable housing and just market rate housing. We're way down on our housing stock. That's covered by House Bill 2053. Is authorizing the Department of Housing and Community Development to convene a stakeholder group to look at the construction of different forms of housing that would address some of the shortages, both in market rate and affordable housing. Energy storage is the subject of the next one as well. Just talking about solar projects that are located in opportunity zones. And again, environmental justice for the next House Bill 2221, environmental permits, taking special notice for the outreach that must be done within those communities, particularly in the construction of or the addition of any construction, demolition, debris, landfills. And then HB 2266, kind of a COVID bill that would increase the opportunity for localities to have special events outdoors, and also making it just less cumbersome to get the permits to do so. And then another energy storage bill, 2269. Again, more of the revenue share stipulations for the megawatt of electric or energy storage systems. Wildlife corridors were addressed, that we would consider wildlife corridors that are shown in the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan with any local and state planning efforts. The next bill just introduces more GIS data, and that's valuable for conservation through the DCR. I don't think there's anything more pertinent to say about that. Carbon sequestration is the next topic, directing the Secretary of Natural Resources to start studying carbon sequestration in the Commonwealth and submit a report on their findings at the beginning of the next session of the General Assembly. And then Senate Bill 1389, as far as disclosures within real estate, it's very important that this was included after, I think there's been a lot of discussion about this over the years, but to make sure that any properties that have been affected or severely damaged with repetitive risk loss, that has to be disclosed for the buyer. And then the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund received additional authorization to take into account the total phosphorus and nitrogen reductions. And that is a broad summary. I'm sure there are things that we did not cover in our weekly meetings. If anyone would like to chime in with some more that we should be particularly aware of, I'd certainly entertain that.
Okay, Barb, thank you. Opening it up to the group. Someone have questions for Barb?
Barb, I was just going to do, you mentioned the environmental permit bill at some point there. I believe that's the bill that did not end up passing out of state, out of the Senate Agriculture Committee. And so there were proposals to have broad notifications. So it may be that I'm thinking of another bill, but there were two. Senator McClellan had one that didn't pass. And then the one that came out of the House also got tied up there. So it may be that one. And it originally had fairly broad applications to water and air permits as well as
water and air permits.
So that's just a possible update.
Yeah, I'll have to check on that. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else?
There is another overarching bill that the governor had Delegate Askew put in, and that is another statewide equity bill that would created this program called One Virginia that's going to require every state agency to conduct a strategic plan on equity. So I'm not sure if that's going to affect the various TPOs or if it's strictly the high level departments or whatnot within state government, but we'll probably hear more about that.
Yes. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, well, if anyone thinks anything else, please remember you can just type it in chat or send Barb an email. I'm sure she'll be able to let you know. Is that, as always, all these things are up, but what they're going to do, no one knows. It's always down to the last minute.
So the governor has until the 31st to sign, and then there's the veto session on the 7th of April. So, of course, that remains to be seen how all that shakes out.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you very much, Barb. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for your input, everybody.
Yes, ma'am. All right, let's flip back, and because we got to, Barb came back, and let's go ahead and finish and take care of future meeting topics. A couple of folks had put in some things they'd like to see more of. Is there anyone else that would like to, to put some input in as to future meeting topics? Of course, it would be later in the year, but please speak up now.
What about the CVTA update? Presentation by, I don't know if it would be by the same staff we have here, or maybe somebody from the CVTA board would come and present about where things are with that toward the end of the year.
Can you comment on that?
Yes, I think that would certainly be something that we would want to include as the CVTA gets legs, and we see how they, they're working through some of their organizational issues right now. Governance report for transit, funding, and that sort of thing. So, but yes, I think towards the end of the year, a report on what's been going on with CVTA would certainly be appropriate. I'll add that as well.
Yes, appreciate it. I would like to make a suggestion, and this might help. I don't know how the group feels. I'm just throwing this out. Let me just use CVTA. Well, maybe you contact them and they say, well, we can't come until January. I'm just using that only as an example. So you say, well, they'll be on next year. Maybe we might include a little thing here, is that with the things that have been suggested, say down below, is that, proposed but not planned yet. So the thing is that we can come back to it, because you may say, well, no, listen, we talked to CVTA, but it won't be till next year. And I'm just giving you an idea of an example, but some of the things we put out, just maybe down below, you could say proposed and working on, or something of that nature.
Sure.
All right, folks. Well, it's down to CTAC announcements and open comment. So does anyone have some announcements? Okay, and of course, open comments to our folks outside. To go into that is, does any of our CTAC members just have some comments? Well, hearing none, I would like to say, please note that the next meeting is May the 20th. That is a Thursday. I hope to be there. I don't know. My wife usually takes me away. My birthday's on Sunday. I'm just putting that out. If anybody wants to send presents, just let you know. But please put that down on your calendar. But hearing nothing else, may I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hearing no opposed. All right, our meeting's adjourned, folks. Thank you once again for your time and your patience. This is much harder, but appreciate it. Take care and be safe out there.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Hey, Ken.
Yes.